Charged Up Episode 10, A Lesson from a Legend.
Are you ready to get charged up about your money, your credit, and your overall financial health? You've come to the right place. You're listening to Charged Up with Jenny Hoff.
Welcome to Charged Up. I'm your host, Jenny Hoff, and a managing editor at CreditCards.com, where we talk a lot about how to avoid debt or get out of debt quickly. But one thing we do talk about is how debt, when used responsibly and paid back on time, can help your credit. Today, we're taking debt to another level with the renowned personal finance author and real estate mogul, Robert Kiyosaki. He wrote the best-selling book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, 20 years ago, and yet this once very controversial book is still referenced today as a guide for learning how to make serious money. He has since written many books, including one with now President Donald Trump called The Midas Touch. Mr. Kiyosaki has a new book coming out, Why the Rich Are Getting Richer, and it proves to be another controversial statement that will make you think differently about taxes and debt. So open your mind, be prepared to hear something different than what you may hear from other financial gurus, and get charged up about getting a lesson from a legend. Robert Kiyosaki, thank you so much for joining us today. It is an honor to speak with you.
Oh, thank you.
So we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of your seminal book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, a bestseller that changed the way millions of people thought about personal finance and financial independence. Now, some people listening right now, if they haven't read the book, they've surely heard its name, but they may wonder, are the lessons you teach in it still applicable today in the 21st century? So can you talk about some of the biggest lessons that you wanted to get across in Rich Dad, Poor Dad and how they're still very relevant today?
When I wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad 20 years ago, it was 1997, and the economy was booming, if you remember. It was just booming. So I came out and I said, your house is not an asset, savers were losers, and the rich don't work for money. So it was blasphemous. You know, the book was turned down by every major publisher. It was kind of laughed at. So, as you know, in 20 years, we've now fundamentally entered a depression. 2008, we crashed into a depression we've not come out of. So, yes, it's more relevant today than ever before because, you know, most people believe in saving money, yet back in 1970 when I graduated from school, you know, if I had, let's say I had $1 million, which I didn't, but if I had $1 million, I got 15% interest on my money. So that's $150,000 on my savings. Today, if I have $1 million in the bank, I might get 1.5%, which means my $1 million is worth only $15,000. You know, that's how much your money has gone down, which is why to save money, the middle class or most people are being crushed right now because their wealth is being ripped off via taxes and inflation.
It's incredible when you think about it because, like you said, if that money just were to sit in the bank, it would have lost a lot of its value. It wouldn't actually be worth $1 million anymore. So what were the big lessons that you wanted to get across in Rich Dad, Poor Dad? One of them I know is that you said people need to have the basic accounting skills to know what their liabilities and their assets are. Can we talk about that a little bit? What do you consider people's liabilities and their assets? And once we know what ours are, what do we need to do about it?
Well, the layperson, you know, they say your house is an asset. But if you look at a financial statement, for most people, their house is a liability. And the definitions are assets put money in your pockets and liabilities take money from your pocket. So let's say you buy a house and it was $100,000, you paid cash for it. It's still taking money from your pocket simply because you have insurance and wear and tear on it. Whereas for myself, I have 6,000 rental properties. So that means every month I have 6,000 checks come in. That's an asset. So a lot had to do with basic accounting, which, as you know, the average person doesn't receive in school.
And so assets, and you go into this in the book, are they still applicable today? And I think you say they're stocks, bonds, gold. What are the different assets that people should be having in their portfolio today?
Well, I don't do that kind of stuff. You know, for example, I was talking to this person and he said, live debt-free. You know, to me, debt is an asset if I know how to use it. So it has nothing to do with the class of thing you invest in. I can have a house. The house can be a liability. I can have a house that'll be an asset. I can have a car, it'll be a liability. And I have a car, it'll be an asset. For most people, their children are liabilities. But if your child is like a movie star, child's an asset, you know. It has nothing to do with the asset class. It has to do with more basic accounting.
Basic accounting and knowing how to make money with your money, right? So it's not about using your money for consumption, but using your money to generate more wealth.
Yeah, and can I be more contrary to that? Is I use debt to make money. I borrow money to buy assets. So that most people are saying get out of debt. And for most people, that's a good idea. Whereas because I'm classically trained in finance, I make money with debt. So the average person puts their money in the bank and they think they're doing the right thing by saving money. So let's say they get 1.5% in the bank. Today, the banks are lending to me at 4%, the same savings, but I use that money to make 20% on debt. So the average person has a saver's mentality, whereas a professional investor has an investor mentality. They're very different mindsets.
I think what's interesting in Rich Dad, Poor Dad is that your real dad was your poor dad. And yet, by most people's accounts, he would be considered very successful, very highly educated, good, stable job, saved his money, took care of his family. And yet he was poor, especially compared to today's wealthy people that we see.
And that's where it starts. It has to do with what you consider good and bad and right and wrong. And my poor dad was, a PhD. Stanford graduate, University of Chicago, Northwestern, and all of that. But as you know, most academics have no idea what money is. That's the problem. You look at President Obama, he paid 30% in tax, and Donald Trump pays 0% in tax. And because Trump is an entrepreneur and Obama is an employee. I don't like to give answers. I just like to compare things. And most people get upset because Trump doesn't pay taxes, but he does that legally. And the average person gets angry rather than say, well, how does Trump get away with not paying any tax? That's what you should learn. That's what financial education is. How do the rich use debt and pay no tax? That's the question, because the average person, debt and taxes makes them poorer, where for the financially educated, debt and taxes make them richer. Trump said some horrible things, but people just get angry at him rather than say, well, how does he do it? That's what I bring to people, is you should question what you're thinking. That's all I'm saying, because most highly educated people are financially ignorant. It's not their fault. At school, teach us nothing about money.
So from your experience, what should we be doing right now to start thinking about how to use debt that way? How to use debt, go get a loan and invest it in a way that's going to reap great rewards? How do we need to think about it? What are some steps that we should be taking?
Well, I'll just give you an example. I have an education, nominations to Naval Academy at Annapolis and Merchant Marine Academy in New York, and I still learned nothing about money. So when I came back from the Vietnam War, where I was a pilot, my poor dad said to me, go fly for the airline. And if I was flying for the airlines today, I might be making $600,000 a year and paying 40% in tax. Whereas rather than listening to my poor dad and go get my MBA and become a pilot, I went to take real estate classes and I learned how to use debt to invest. So those real estate classes, I learned to use debt and I pay zero tax legally. That's the difference in education is what I'm trying to say. So for most people, their viewpoint of the world depends upon their education. So my poor dad, again, Stanford graduate, University of Chicago, Northwestern, PhD, he had no financial education like Obama, and his viewpoint of the world is like Obama, whereas my rich dad was more like Trump. The education was different. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying one is right or wrong. But my concern is the reason I wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and 20 years later it's coming true now, is I'm just asking people to question what they were taught in school. Were they taught to go to school and get a job and save money, get out of debt, and invest for the long term in the stock market in a 401k or a Roth IRA? And most people think that's intelligent, but it requires no financial education to do any of that. And for most people, they're in trouble because they're following that advice. I know it's rough and it sounds nasty to people, but that's what I said in 1997, 20 years ago. Every publisher turned down my book.
Yeah, and you self-published it, right?
Yeah, they couldn't see what was coming. See, what happened, we left the industrial age in the year 2000, and the information age began in 2000. We've had three major crashes in the first 10 years of the century. The first crash was 2000, which was a dot-com crash, which was a lot bigger than the 1929 crash. Then came the 2007 real estate crash, subprime crash, and then 2008 came the banking crash. And all of those crashes are 1,000 times bigger than the 1929 crash. And the average person doesn't know that because they can't see the difference. So that's why I wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad, because I could see the crashes coming.
And what do you see now? Do you see that continuing to happen? And if that is the case, what can we do right now to start preparing for that and become financially independent and not dependent on jobs that we could very quickly start losing?
Well, that's a great question. I'll repeat what I said. You may want to question what you were taught. Did your mother and father say go to school and get a job when jobs are disappearing and student loan debt's going through the roof? And did they tell you to buy a house because it's an asset when it's really a liability? And did they tell you to save money when interest rates have come down from 15% to, in some parts of the world, negative percent? And, most people say get out of debt when in 1971 the U.S. dollar became debt after President Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. So the people that are being crushed right now are people who are following that advice because inflation and taxes is making them poorer. And as I said, I'll just go back as a comparison. In 1970, when I graduated from college, I got 15% on $1 million, and today I'm lucky if I get 1.5%. That's how much the value of money has been destroyed. And people still say to their kids, save money, and they're getting wiped out. That's why I wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I wasn't trying to make anybody happy. I was just kind of warning people.
So I follow you on social media, and you've been mentioning in a lot of posts that we need to really start creating passive income streams. Well, you've always mentioned that we need to have passive income streams. And in the 21st century, there's opportunities obviously online for businesses and not having to start a business brick and mortar. Can you talk about some ideas for passive income streams that we could get going?
Sure. I met this one young man, he's 21 years old, and he has an app, and he makes $1 million a month off of it. But he's very happy, 22 years old, 21 years old. So the good news is the iPhone or technology has made it easier to be an entrepreneur than ever before. But the caveat is that the skill sets to be an entrepreneur are opposite of the skill sets to be an employee. For example, to be a successful entrepreneur, your most important skill is the ability to sell, whereas you don't need that to be an employee. And then for an entrepreneur, you must understand debt and taxes, which most people don't understand. And the third part is accounting. And as I said, Rich Dad, Poor Dad is a basic book on accounting. That's all it is. But most people have not had accounting in school. So to be an entrepreneur, you've really got to have accounting. And the average person doesn't. So that's why the failure rate for entrepreneurs is so high. 9 out of 10 fail.
So what are other ways that people can try to create a passive income?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways. Like that kid did it with an app. Those guys who did Angry Birds, they did fabulously. And, look at Steve Jobs. He never finished school, created Apple. And I do mine primarily through real estate because I can use debt and pay no tax. So that's why I have 6,000 rental units. I never sell them. I don't flip them. I just get income from them every month. So it's about $1 million a month. Well, it's not Donald Trump money, but it's tax-free money. That's what education does. It teaches you those things. I'm not saying you should do it, but I'm saying that's what I do. Whereas Dave Ramsey, my friend, says live debt-free. I don't do that. I'm deeply in debt, but it's debt that produces income. So that's what education should be. It gives you the comparison between advice. And then I met a woman who works for the Federal Reserve Bank, and she's highly educated, PhD, and she says you should buy municipal bonds. And I say they pay 1 or 2%. Well, that's really good. And if you understand, if I use debt, my return on investment is infinite because it's not my money, it's bank's money. So I'm just basically saying that financial education is not what they teach you in school. So I use debt because I get an infinite return and I pay no tax legally.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, the tax structure was there to incentivize people to do things that the government wants. And if you're investing in real estate and buying land and doing those things, then you get rewarded for that.
Yeah, and you're fabulous. Thank you so much because you're one of the best interviews I've ever had because a lot of times they get angry at me when they fail to realize that the tax laws are incentives. For example, when I buy real estate, for low-income housing, I get tax breaks for that. You can do the same thing. But if I buy a house for me, I don't get that big a tax break. If I drill for oil, I get huge tax breaks because the government wants us to be energy independent from Saudi Arabia. So let's say I put $1 million or $100,000 into oil projects, not Standard Oil or Exxon. If I put it into an oil project, I get an 80% return day one. If I put money in Standard Oil, I might get 2%. But it's because the government incentivizes me to drill for oil. If I grow food, I get huge tax breaks because the government wants me to provide food. But if I buy food at Safeway, I get charge tax. So what I attempt to explain to people is money is like a three-sided coin, heads, tails, and the edge of a coin. And what Rich Dad, Poor Dad was attempting to do was have people stand on the edge of the coin and look on one side and see what the poor and middle class are doing, and on the other side, look at what the rich are doing. As you know, 1% of the rich own 80% of all the wealth.
And that's actually something you talk about in your new book, which I wanted to get to, Why the Rich Are Getting Richer. It's yet to come out, but I want to talk a little bit about what do you have in that book? What are the lessons that you want to teach us? What are the points that you really want to make that the average person needs to learn?
Thank you for that question. First of all, I recommend Rich Dad, Poor Dad because the next book, Why the Rich Are Getting Richer, is like Rich Dad Graduate School. So, and that's where I go more specifically into debt and taxes. So for most people, again, they get angry because, first of all, they weren't taught this, but it also looks like guys like Trump and myself are cheating. But we're just following the tax law. And the facts are, the tax laws are written for everybody, but without financial education, you can't follow the tax law. So the laws are fair from one point of view, but most people cannot do what Trump and I do because they lack financial education. And financial education, in our case, is imperative we understand debt, how to use debt, and how to use taxes. Again, it's a little bit more sophisticated, and that's why the rich are getting richer. And I'm very concerned about our middle class shrinking, and so is Donald Trump. That's why he's working to bring jobs back to America. He's very concerned. I mean, he's been a friend of mine for about 12 years. Again, I don't agree with some of the nasty remarks he's made, but I just ask you to look at how he does it and how I do it and keep an open mind.
I will definitely be reading that book because I think there is a lot to learn to knowing how to use the tax code to your advantage. I think a lot of people feel guilty or they say, no, I shouldn't write that off or it's my duty and stuff. But again, if you are able to write it off, as you say, there's a reason for that. And it's not going against the law. And people should use it to their advantage because the more money that you're paying out is the less money that you get to keep and invest.
Right. And the primary reason people are struggling today is because their so-called quote-unquote money is being destroyed by inflation and taxes. You know, the average employee pays 40% of their income in taxes. A self-employed person like a doctor or a small entrepreneur, like somebody who owns a dress shop or something, they're going to pay 65% of their money in taxes. So all of these guys are saying, well, I'm going to start my own business. You walk into the trap of self-employment, and self-employment tax is 60 to 65%, 75% in California. So they wonder why there's no more jobs coming out, is most of the entrepreneurs who start their own business are wiped out via taxes. I mean, I hate to laugh, but I go, God, can anybody see what's happening? So that's what I cover in Why the Rich Are Getting Richer, how I use debt and how I use taxes.
Wow, that's incredible. Those numbers are incredible. I just moved back from Germany where it was 55% plus that you pay in taxes, which is strangling in a lot of ways. And yet in a lot of states in the United States, it's the same or more.
Well, like I said, if let's say I'm a doctor, my friend's a doctor in California, he pays 70% of his income in taxes. So he's really happy he made $1 million, but he netted $300,000. So that's what they don't understand. And people forget America was actually a tax-free nation. It was called the Boston Tea Party. I'm not a Tea Party member, but taxes only came into effect when the Federal Reserve Bank was created back in 1913. So the Fed was created in 1913, and so was IRS. Kind of interesting. So the average person doesn't know that, and they think it's patriotic to pay taxes because in 1943, the Current Tax Payment was created, and the Current Tax Payment Act was created to pay for World War II. And what the Current Tax Payment Act granted the government the power to do was, let's say, an employee gets your paycheck, and you wonder where the money went. Well, the money disappeared because of the Current Tax Payment Act, which so the government can get paid, and Americans say it's patriotic.
And so it never changed. World War II ended, but that money is still taken out of the paycheck.
Right, and that's when Eisenhower said, beware of the military-industrial complex, because ever since they could start collecting that tax, America's been at war. So, you know, I'm a Vietnam-era vet, went to Vietnam twice, and I get sick when I think about it. I get sick when I think about our troops in Iraq and Syria and all that. You know, all I espouse is financial education, and then you as an individual can decide what's best for you. You know, my friend Dave Ramsey says, live debt-free. Well, that's fine, but I'd rather learn to use debt to get rich. But you have to study. So Dave Ramsey's advice is good for people who don't want to study finance or money. So it's a free country. It's your choice. So you can either live debt-free or you can learn to use debt to get rich and pay no tax.
So speaking of that, what would you have done if you were your friend who was making $1 million as a doctor in California, paying 70% in taxes? If you were him, what would you be doing differently?
Well, the very smart thing he did, because he did listen to me, it took about 3 years to pound him on the head. But I said, you got to go to real estate. So what he did, because, you know, he was working out of an office that he rented. So he went and bought a large piece of real estate using debt. And then he put other doctors in it, so he's collecting rent. And now he pays no tax because he became a real estate owner. So he's not doing anything different except he owns the building.
And yet it's generating cash flow for him. And at the same time, he's got an asset that he's not paying taxes on.
Correct. Other doctors are paying him rent. He pays no rent. And then the government says you can depreciate your building. And the building's amortizing and appreciating.
And those doctors who are paying him rent are first paying their taxes to the government, and then what's left over, they pay rent to him.
Correct. Well, actually, because it's a business, they pay the rent, but it's an income expense. The point here is this, is the average person has no idea what you and I are talking about right now because they listen to Dave Ramsey and say, well, live debt-free. And my doctor friend now has probably $3 million in debt, and he's making a lot more money because he's not paying tax on top of it.
Yeah, so do you cover a lot of this in your book, Why the Rich Are Getting Richer? Do you educate us on what we need to know about tax law and debt?
Yeah, but I also have, my accountant, who's my personal advisor, wrote a book called Tax-Free Wealth, which people should read. Not that they're going to be an accountant, but so they can interview their accountant. Most accountants don't do what my tax advisor advises me to do, because most accountants are employees, and my accountant's an entrepreneur. Very big different mindset.
There's a lot to chew on there. I love to give my audience 3 actionable items that they can take away with. I know the biggest one is educate yourself about finance. What would you say are the 3 major things that everybody listening to this podcast should leave and start doing immediately?
Well, just realize that all coins have 3 sides. Heads, tails, and the edge. And the most important thing is to get to the edge of the coin and decide what sides are best for you. For example, the poor and middle class, debt makes them poorer. On the rich side, debt makes them richer. And then they could decide, well, I can either listen to Dave Ramsey and go debt-free, or I can take a class on how to invest in real estate using debt. That's the choice. Be an active investor. The other thing right now is there's a great book called The Road to Ruin by the smartest guy I know. His name is James Rickards, Rickards. I would read that book because he does a better job of explaining the crisis we're in now. And the third thing is I would be holding physical gold, not in a bank. And I wouldn't be buying gold ETFs. I'd be owning physical gold. Let's say your expenses are $3,000 a month. I'd buy 2 gold coins, U.S. Eagles. That's about $3,000. And I don't look at gold as an investment. I look at it as kind of an insurance policy. So I'd hold about $36,000 in gold because I don't think the dollar is going to last much longer.
That's what I was going to ask. So you think there's going to be a monetary collapse?
Yes. And Rickards doesn't call it a crash. He calls it a thermonuclear meltdown. But he backs it up with facts and figures. So The Road to Ruin it's a relatively easy book to read. I think Rickards is the smartest guy around today. He advises the richest people on earth. And he is kind of like me, kind of being like Paul Revere saying, hey, pay attention, something's coming. So I think it's most important. And like I said, I really thank you for a great interview, but to be open-minded right now and question what you've been taught. That's what it is.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people learned that in 2008, right? That they should be questioning what they're taught about real estate and everything else that we were involved with.
Yeah, and one more thing is crashes are great because, in 2008, when the whole thing came tumbling down, I borrowed $300 million to buy real estate. So crashes are good. That'd be like Walmart having a sale at 50%. Everybody would run to Walmart. But if the stock market or real estate market has a crash, everybody runs away.
Yeah, it's true. And sells at a loss.
Yeah. It's human nature. And the reason I like real estate, I like gold, is I can see, touch, and feel it. I control it. Every ounce of gold in the world, for every ounce of gold, there's 5,000 ounces of paper gold. That's like you owning 1 acre of land, and 5,000 other people think they own it too.
Okay, so with gold is, if you can every month, buy as much gold as you spend every month so you have something to back it up. Don't put it in a bank. Don't put it in a safety deposit box. Don't buy it in paper or ETFs. Keep it as a tangible object, right, somewhere safe where you can access it no matter what happens. Yeah, I call it Plan B. Plan A is being optimistic, and Plan B is being pessimistic. And a lot of times Plan B makes you richer because you're kind of open-minded. I have lots of gold. I've been saving gold since 1972, and I never spend it. It's like my real estate. I never sell my real estate. I just keep money coming in. I don't have anything in the stock market because I like to control what I have. Very interesting. So nothing in the stock market, no asset management funds, nothing like that? No. Because I can make more money with debt and taxes with no risk. There's just different perspective. I am a professional investor. I'm not a professional golfer. You know what I mean? So I don't try to make money playing golf. So if I was a professional golfer, maybe I'd have stocks. But most of my time, I'm buying
property and starting businesses.
So for people listening, before you go into debt to do these things, educate yourself, learn the skills. Like you said, you're a professional finance person. You understand finance, so you understand how to use debt. And read these books, Why the Rich Are Getting Richer, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Understand the concepts, look further into it so that you really have a good grasp before you make any financial decision. And then be prepared.
Yeah, because, I think a lot of people are afraid right now, and rightfully so. And the book, again, it's The Road to Ruin by James Rickards, Rickard. I couldn't put it down once I started to read it. It's very well written, and it explains better than I could ever explain my point of view. And I think that's what people are looking for, is somebody who says something they don't believe in so their mind can open at least. But if you believe in going to school to get a job, most people are already coming out loaded with student loan debt. And the robots are coming. My friend Trump can't stop that. So they're probably just going to tax the robots.
Well, I loved this conversation. To me, it's very enlightening. I think that it's so important to open your mind, to look at things that you don't agree with and try to see that point of view, because there were a lot of people before that crash who were saying this crash is coming, but nobody paid attention to them. And they ended up losing a lot of money in the process. And finally, our podcast is called Charged Up. So what charges you up about teaching people about true financial mastery?
I just came back from Spain, and we had like 800 people in the room, and they paid a lot of money to be in that room. And it was myself, my accountant, my attorney, and who I call my Donald Trump Jr., and we co-taught. So the accountant has one point of view, the attorney has a point of view, I have a point of view, and my Donald Trump Jr., Ken McElroy, he has a point of view. And people's minds are just blown apart, because what I always say to everybody is inside all of us is a poor person. There's a part of me that's real cheap. There's a middle class person, somebody who wants security and comfort. But then there's also the person that's rich, wants to be rich. And so when people realize that it's not about going to school to get rich, because they don't teach you anything about getting rich in school anyway, they could be rich too. And that's when you see the lights go on. They still have to study, but instead of trying to be secure and comfortable like the middle class do, they understand they have the potential to have as much money as they want with a little education.
Absolutely. Wow. Very, very interesting. I'm going to get reading myself, because I think that there's a lot of lessons that we should be learning to how to control our financial destiny.
Yeah. And this Tax-Free Wealth by Tom Wheelwright. Read that and then have your accountant read it. And then you'll understand taxes are the key. Remember, Trump pays 0, Obama pays 30. And it's just a point of view.
Absolutely. Mr. Kiyosaki, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been a very enlightening conversation.
Well, thank you, because you're very open-minded. I generally get in arguments, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for this episode of Charged Up. If you enjoyed the interview, please rate and review us on iTunes. You can also subscribe and be alerted as soon as a new episode is up. If you want to read the transcript of this episode or previous episodes, as well as see photos of our different guests, please visit us over at CreditCards.com and click on the podcast link. If you have questions or issues that you want me to ask or answer on air, please send me an email at chargedup@CreditCards.com. Meanwhile, get charged up about your financial future.